Welcome, everybody, to another episode of SEOs Getting Coffee. Today, we have a very special guest with us, and it's Ali Anderson. And Ali, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please say hello to our lovely listeners.
Hi, yeah, great to meet you. First of all, I'm so excited to be on this podcast. I've listened to a few episodes and I just think it's great. You guys are so like personable and you just talk with them, with the guests. And you know, it's been really interesting to see like different podcasts and how people react. And I feel like you guys do a great job of just making it, yeah, feel like a conversation. So,
Oh, thank you very much.
yeah.
Let's start with a compliment. Brilliant.
Oh,
Brilliant.
nice. Well done,
Oh yeah,
Ali.
it's all planned out. Uh, yeah, Ali Anderson. I currently am the owner of Ali Anderson SEO, so I'm actually the only employee. I've really enjoyed it. It's just a consulting agency, and it's been really fun for me to sort of go on my own. And I actually started in-house. I worked for a couple of years in-house at a B2B SaaS company. Loved it. It was a great experience, and I got to learn a lot about, like the deeper pieces of how SEO works within, when you're in-house. And then I ended up going on my own for a little while and then finding a really great agency that I worked at for about 4 years. And so it was kind of fun having like both experiences and like starting in-house, then moving to a faster paced agency and got to work with a lot of different types of clients, small businesses, enterprise. But towards the middle of that stint, I started working mostly with B2B SaaS, and I worked with B2B SaaS for a while. All my clients were B2B SaaS.
My favorite.
Yeah,
One of my favorites.
it's fun. It's definitely content, and we can get into this later, obviously, but content is like really fun for B2B SaaS, in my opinion. But yeah, and then we started diving into some more e-commerce clients, and I was just realizing like, oh, it's crazy how different like the strategies are for these two, industries. Um, so yeah, and then after that, I ended up deciding I have two kids. Life got really crazy at the
Well
agency with
done.
I have two boys, two little boys. And so I was like, I just want a little more control over my schedule and what clients I'm bringing on, things like that. So decided to branch out on my own.
Yeah, big
Nice.
big shout out to the SEOs with children who have to balance that family life with SEO
It's
work.
wild, yeah.
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 Just
So yeah,
different, right?
yeah, indeed, and I think you touched on it really nicely there. And I think just to introduce the topic of today, which is B2B versus e-commerce SEO strategies, which I think is going to be a really interesting topic to explore. So I guess like from to introduce that, I guess really is that it would be great if we could just for our audience out there who maybe not as familiar with some of the SEO terms, just to kind of briefly give an overview of obviously what B2B SEO is and what e-commerce SEO is. I know obviously some people will obviously know that, but just for any listeners out there that perhaps don't know what those terms mean.
Yeah, for sure. I actually appreciate you saying that because I learned a lot of SEO from like podcasts. So like starting out, listening, learning all the terms is really helpful. So yeah, B2B SaaS or B2B business to business. So it's a company that sells to other businesses, right? Instead of selling products to like consumers, right? And SaaS is software as a service. So it's generally like a software company that sells to other companies. And then, yeah, e-commerce, obviously, it's a company selling products online, tangible products. So, yeah, those would be the differences in my opinion. Do you guys have any other thoughts about the difference
No,
between the two?
Mm,
that's great.
That's a
Yeah, thank
very
you
good,
for
yeah,
yeah,
it's a good, like,
brilliant.
straight to the point. And when you're thinking about SEO, obviously, they do very different things. They have very different audiences. So presumably, we all know here that the approach is very different when you're talking about search engine optimization. So what are some of the kind of the main differences that you've like spotted?
Yeah. Well, yeah, to your point, Amina, like I think first of all, knowing the audience is so important. And I think a lot of SEOs, we kind of get a bad rap for just like being in a little vacuum where we're just like doing the checking the boxes, of what you need to do as an SEO, but really getting into like the customer is so important. Yeah, they are very different, right? So, I think B2B SaaS, you see a lot of, so I guess one way I would explain it is there's like so many different things, but one of the things I noticed off the bat is, in B2B SaaS, you're usually selling to like multiple people. So you have someone who's maybe looking for your product because they're going to be personally using it, but they might not be the decision maker of like who buys the product, right? So they might have to, prove the value of that to someone higher up, and et cetera, right? So that's definitely something you don't see in e-commerce for the most part, right? It's usually just one person buying something, right, for themselves. So that was an interesting thing to think about, right? Is like, not only are you having to write content and really understand the needs of the person actually using your product and looking for your product, but also how do you help them prove that it's valuable to someone above them who's going to be signing off on budget, so there's definitely that piece from an audience perspective, whereas e-commerce, you really just need to convince that one person, right? Like, this is worth your money. So I would say that's one big one. I think for me, especially, where I saw the biggest difference was in like optimization. So, for B2B companies, I feel like content can be, if you want really good movement from a page optimization, especially like a blog article or something like that, like it has to be pretty detailed. Like, I think you've got to really make lots of changes to see a big difference. And that might be like a hot take. I don't know. I know a lot of SEOs love like, let's just change some title tags and meta descriptions, and like
No,
that'll make
no,
that'll make a
doesn't
big
work.
impact.
No,
Yeah.
not in
No, it does.
B2B.
Yeah.
No, no.
Not in B2B. Yeah. And I was like, so really getting like in the weeds with that made a big difference for optimizations in B2B. Whereas e-commerce, like, it can make a big difference, right? If you have the right title tags and meta descriptions, it can make a big difference for, rankings and things like that. So I just thought, I was like, wow, that's so crazy. Like, they're very different from an optimization standpoint as well. And there's like a lot more, obviously, but I'd say those are like my two big ones, two big differences.
Yeah, I agree. I think, obviously, even now with e-commerce, there's product pages and collection pages is something that you care about the most. It's like the 80-20 rules up to 100, because obviously content itself, not a lot of e-commerce does content really.
Right.
But what's interesting is it's moving even in e-commerce. Do you find that even in e-commerce, before it was very, like meta tags and the basics. If you've done the basics right, you're off to a great start. But in my experience, more and more, you have this situation where even in e-commerce, there's so many amazing product pages out there. So how do you like differentiate yourself? What is the extra bit? It's starting to be more competitive. This is at least my experience when it comes to it.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. And I think maybe the thing that they have in common is what we already brought up, which is like really knowing your audience. If you don't know your audience and like what stands out to them, then for either business, right, it's not, you have to create content that's to your specific audience. And I think on one of your other episodes, you were talking about like competitor research. And I think that's been interesting too, for both of these industries, is like not looking sideways for what to do necessarily, because I know, Emina, you brought up that you like to look at them to get an idea of like what their audiences are doing, but not necessarily to like just copy them. And I think that's probably the problem with a lot of e-commerce brands. It's just kind of copy and paste, right? Like, but you got to stand out. So yeah, really knowing your specific audience, I think, makes a big difference there, and like writing content that's specific to them and like their interests. And then I think there's a lot of like social and different aspects that play into that, like brand awareness and things. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think what I've enjoyed a lot about seeing the difference between the two is, when you like really dig into like talking to their sales teams or talking to people who are communicating more frequently with customers, you can see like, oh, there are big differences in how this person buys versus how a B2B SaaS company buys versus e-commerce, and like the whole sales funnel is just like very different between the two.
Very different. I mean, in particularly in B2B SaaS, the funnel can be like months and months and months, whereas in e-commerce it can be very, very short.
And that's like you kind of, sorry, I mean, you kind of, that's what you kind of were touching on, is the fact that like you might have so many touch points, or you might have that person revisiting the site. So you want content, that kind of covers all bases. You want content that, obviously grabs people's attention, brings them into your sales funnel, but you also want that content that's going to nurture them along the way as well. So that's why, like, obviously with B2B and especially SaaS and stuff, it's always great to have these big kind of support hubs on the site, because then like people can get an idea of like, okay, well, what are the challenges and things that people are currently experiencing with the product. And I think often those make really kind of compelling, content pieces, even though it's like help and support articles. Actually, like, all that kind of ties in with the content strategy. It's not always necessarily 100% SEO based,
and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, actually, something that I started doing a couple of years ago that made a big difference in like how I did keyword research and content creation, is like I would meet for every client. Like I wouldn't just have an onboarding call with, my main point of contact, but also with like some of their sales leaders. Like if they were a B2B SaaS company, I find sales engineers are like really, they're full of like so much knowledge because they're solutioning for, their clients. So they really, or for their company. So they really know like the deep ins and outs of like the problems that people are dealing with that are coming into their company. But anyway, so talking with a sales leader, and talking with also like customer success has been like so interesting, and asking them points about like, what are their pain points, like what are people bringing up. Like I think AEs, they don't really communicate sometimes as much with marketing teams, but they have so much insight in like what people are asking, what are common problems that are being brought up, like is there some like sticky point with the business that keeps coming up on calls. And I think with e-commerce, obviously it's a little different, but similarly, talking to like founders, product developers, things like that, like you can really understand similarly like what are people like, why are people coming to you, what are they asking about. And I think sometimes at an agency especially, it can be really, to scale, like you're like trying to have less meetings, but you can miss out on a lot of content opportunities by only talking to your POC, when you're onboarding clients. But
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so I found that to be really helpful.
It's interesting because on the e-commerce side, there isn't many people to talk to usually. So how do you like bridge that divide really? So what have you been using to get that wealth of information on the audience in the e-commerce? And I have some ideas, but I wanted to hear what you
Yeah, I'll love to hear your ideas too, because I'm sure you've got great ones. Yeah, depending on the type of product, I worked with like a beauty brand, and I would talk to like some of their product developers, and they actually do a lot of audience research if it's like cosmetic or clothing is a little different and things like that. Like other products are a little different, but anyway, that was an example that I had, is like talking with their product developers, talking with their customer research teams. Like a lot of them do have those. If they're smaller, maybe not. But that's definitely brought like a wealth of information. And we actually started writing content. To your point, Emina, like e-commerce can have more content if you just have to do it the right way. And so we did start writing a lot of content based on sort of their feedback, and it was really helpful for sales. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the same thing. There's a lot of like online resources as well, social listening on the kind of e-commerce side. It's really interesting to track how people are actually using the stores. This is the other, like data. For me, data becomes very, I mean, not that it's not important in B2B, it is super important. But with e-commerce, particularly because you can see how people are using your website, using tools such as Hotjar, for example. There's other kind of stores as well that you can learn from and how they've done it. So it's it's interesting. I always go straight to the sales guys when I'm working with B2B, like immediately sales guys
Nice.
and customer service. Whereas when I'm working in e-commerce, by the time, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I haven't worked with loads of clients, you can tell me, in e-commerce. But in e-commerce, it feels like there's a lot to be done first on the website.
Oh yeah.
And then go and talk to, talk to the actual team. Not that we don't talk to them right away, we do, but it's more of a different process.
Totally. Yeah. It's been interesting, like doing strategies, like initial strategies for the two different industries. Because yeah, to your point, like with B2B SaaS, you have like, I always think of it like I'm really nerdy, so I love like Batman. Anyway, like a Batman utility belt, right? So you have like all your things like tech audits, and content audits, and internal linking, external linking, whatever. And it's fun because I feel like with B2B SaaS, it's so like who knows, right? It's like, oh, actually, tech doesn't really matter for you guys. Like you're looking pretty good. Like really, you need to focus on internal linking. Like that's where you're weak. Or your pages could be optimizer. Anyway, but yeah, with e-commerce, to your point, like there's almost always a lot of tech issues, and like almost always you gotta fix those first because there's usually thousands of pages, and I don't know, internal linking and hierarchy I think also is like really important for e-commerce, and I find most of the time like that's the thing you have to start with before, to your point, you dive into like content, because if they can't find the page, then it's pointless. So
that was one of my questions, was around like the technical side of things, because that's where I saw some of the kind of the glaring differences between B2B and e-commerce. So you've mentioned site architecture, obviously, like collections, product pages, canonical, and Shopify with the collection URL.
Oh my gosh,
a complete nightmare. But what are some of the kind of the other bits that from a technical point of view that you found that were interesting when you look at like the differences between the two?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say B2B SaaS, or I should say B2B, but B2B companies, I feel like I see, a wide variety of different like technical issues. Like I'd say like redirect circles, or like, multiple redirects happens frequently. I would say I see a lot of like site speed issues, mostly images, things like that. But honestly, that's pretty similar on e-commerce. I would say hierarchy-wise, like definitely on B2B SaaS, I think it's like site architecture is a little less impactful, I find. It's still impactful, but usually people like it's pretty simple to do it right. Yeah, but from e-commerce side, I would definitely say like lots of issues with like no index pages, or the canonical issue. I would say lots of orphan pages happen pretty frequently because there's just so many, they get lost a lot.
Duplicates. Oh my God, the duplicates when you can access the page in from several places.
It's such a nightmare. And I don't know, e-commerce, it's actually really fun because it's like definitely the tech audit's really fun because it's like there's just so many things that do make a big difference there. And I would say like site architecture is a big deal there because a lot of companies I find like, if you don't have an SEO on your team, then it tends to just be really messy, like the way that it's created. So you have to go back through and say like, okay, is there like a main product page that these other separate products could live on? And like sometimes it's just not very intuitive, I guess.
Things like a web developer's, kind of right. Okay, it makes sense to the web developer of how they structure it, but then actually, or it makes sense to somebody who's like, oh, that really should go into that. But then when you, from the SEO side, you're thinking, oh no, it needs to go into these different hierarchies because actually for the SEO that makes more sense for the SEO side. I think that's one of the kind of the most common things is that they haven't got an SEO on their team. Is that it's just not. It doesn't make sense to SEOs, I find.
Yeah, I love talking with like developers and trying to understand like, okay, that doesn't, like that's why this was built this way, but it may not work out so well for SEO. And I think too that's where like customer research does come into play though, because you can come to them and say, because I have found sometimes it's hard to convince a developer team like why it needs to be different. And that's where, you know, you can come in with customer research and say like, hey, like when people are looking for this product, they're usually thinking it's associated with like this. So that's where we need to, you know, we need to have a main category page with this topic, you know, instead of the one that is currently built. And I find that usually convinces people to like get on board the changes. But yeah, definitely like, yeah, so technically there are definitely issues that are different between the two. I really love Sitebulb. It's like my favorite tech audit
Georgia is
product.
gonna be happy. Oh, it's good. They haven't
It
tried.
is.
Let's
yeah.
not. Let's. I love Sitebulb as well. I haven't tried the cloud one yet, but this is, and for e-commerce, on the technical side, one of the reasons why it's so different is because these are massive sites. Unless you have like a really like a small store that you're running with a few products, you know, these are like you're constantly creating new pages because you're constantly creating new product. So very easily, similar to publishers, your site just starts bloating. So there's all kind of crawl issues as well. I mean, you know, like, okay, you have to be very big to get to the point where you have a crawl budget issue. But it's easier to get to that size if you're e-commerce than if you're B2B. I mean, I've never seen, maybe there are some B2B sites that are kind of falling into that, but I have never worked with a B2B site that had fallen into this kind of crawl budget issue that happened. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have. Maybe because they had a lot of pages that were like pretty poor content. So I don't know if that's just like crawl budget or just Google was like, yeah, I don't want to crawl this. But yeah, I mean, bloat gets to be a big problem. And then the other problem I noticed is a lot of companies don't keep like a tech log or a site, you know, update log. So one thing that I like to do is like I look in analytics. It's a little trickier with GA4, but looking into like all of the traffic for every page like a year ago, and then, you know, comparing it to all the traffic for the pages now, and then I run those through a crawler, and just a lot of times it's like crazy. They'll like delete a page that had a ton of traffic because someone was like, oh, you know, instead of doing like a redirect, they just build a new page because they wanted a different URL or something, and like this page has just disappeared. And I find that a lot with e-commerce too. Like they'll just have all these pages that were getting traffic and they're just kind of disappeared. No one really noticed that they were gone. You know, especially if you don't have SEOs on your team.
Products. You change products. You're constantly changing products. You might retire a product, think, okay, we don't, but then you don't kind of think about how that's gonna impact your whole domain. You know, maybe that product was linked from everywhere and everybody was linked to it.
It's like 50 backlinks.
The number one issue I see is like if I ever see like an e-commerce client that we're talking to or come, and like the first thing that I do is just look at 404 pages straight away because it's just because like 9 times out of 10 they're just not managing that correctly. So you'll have like, you know, and this has happened recently. There's been 2 e-commerce clients in a short space of time who we've been, you know, kind of talking to and pitching for and trying to, you know, kind of, you know, get on board to say, you know, look, you know, there's some real kind of potential here with SEO. And the 2 things that both of them had in common was the fact that they just had these humongous lists of like 404 pages that were just products because they have large inventories. It's just products that are essentially just kind of go, oh, we don't do that anymore. Where's the page gone? Oh, it's gone. It's disappeared, you know.
Which is,
it's like,
you know, it's
you know, you got this link here. You know,
but could you just redirect?
Link.
It's fine if you don't have the links, but if you have something that has like a ton of links, I don't care about 404s if they don't have links. Everybody has.
It's fine.
You should still manage them. It's like, I think, you know, from my perspective,
this is where we disagree, me and Sean. We always have this like 404 conversation.
It's good housekeeping, right? It's like it kind of like if you continually keep your room clean or your house tidy, like if you just put something away or whatever else, like it promotes that kind of, you know, you kind of keep a level of maintenance with your website that might, you know, encourage.
It's much easier.
Kind of, rather than just going, oh, those 404 pages, I'm just going to chuck them all in this drawer over here. You know, just forget about them. But yeah, but it's true, because then it's, you'll have like a product. There's another classic example as well, that they had like this product that they retired, but it was a really popular product. It got like media attention and all this kind of thing. So you have these big, named, national and international websites that are, linking to this product. And then where's the product? It's gone. It's not there. And I wrote a piece of content as well recently, probably at the start of last year, which was like looking into Land Rover, and they had exactly the same issue. They had this store at one point where they had these little Land Rover key rings, and they had like loads of links from it. They had about 5.5 thousand backlinks, I think it was, to these products and these product pages, and they're just gone. They're not being utilized because those URLs don't exist anymore, and they got all these, So yeah, it's and that's an e-commerce. That is e-commerce. That was their e-commerce store that they had. So
yeah, it's like in those cases, especially, it's like I think it's pretty easy to like figure out a way to use that. You don't have to necessarily obviously keep the product, but there's redirects or other things that you could do. I also find with e-commerce especially, people are clicking generally to buy, right? So if you don't have like related products or something else on a 404, I think, if you're like, we don't have this product anymore,
But these are
here's some other
similar
related
ones.
products,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
our new version or whatever. It's like someone came here to buy this. So, if you're missing out on so much opportunity
that's a really
if you
key
don't have
point.
something
And I
else.
think that's exactly. It's like, it's, let's say, one of the examples I can think of recently was it was, say, like personalized key rings, right? And personalized key rings, okay, you don't do personalized key rings anymore. So what if you don't do them at all? Where do we send people? We can't really send them to the homepage because they're looking for personalized key rings. We can't
Right.
really send them to just normal key rings because they're looking for personalized key rings. So it's at that point you have to make that decision of, well, actually, does that need to be kept as well? Actually, do you need to say, right, that's 404, it's 410, that stays as it is, because we don't have this anymore. You need to look elsewhere, and I think that's the key as well, is that you don't need to redirect everything, or actually you need to kind of make a decision about what you do with it, because it's not always appropriate, is it? So
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just mindful of time, but I really want to ask you about one of the things that's my kind of pet peeve between the two, actually. So we've always known, one of the things that happens is that with e-commerce, it's not easy to track results, but it's easier to track results than when you have B2B. So tell us a little bit about your experience on the both sides of like tracking results, and how has that changed recently as well?
Yeah, I actually I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about that too. It's like one of the big differences. It's not perfect, but it's so much easier on e-commerce. And it's so much easier to report on, because it's like, we did this happened, and there are always other factors, but yeah, I feel like it's pretty simple. I use different reports. Databox is actually a really interesting reporting software. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one, but
I've heard of it before.
yeah, and it can combine a lot of different types of data into one space. And anyway, so for reporting for e-commerce, that's a great option. And it just takes a lot of the load off of you, because I've used Looker as well, but it's, it just takes more effort. But B2B is just, it's really hard. When I worked in-house, we had a whole team of marketing ops. Like there were 4 or 5 different people that were trying to create like a multi-touch attribution model for our business. And even with that entire team working on it, like we never could nail it down. It's just so hard. And, then it's like, who is the first touch and who gets credit for this? Anyway, it can be really tricky. I've been really interested lately in, I think, Chris Walker has talked about this a lot. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's Refine Labs. He has, although he does have a little negative to say about SEOs, I think.
The attribution mirage.
Yes. But I think he has some really great points too that I think we should, we can all like confront ourselves with. But yeah, I think he's talked a lot about self-reported attribution, and I do think that's helpful. I have a couple of clients who use that, and every month we talk about like, did anybody come to you and say like, hey, I found you on Google? And usually there are a good amount that say that that's how they found that product. And, we can measure success to some extent based on, are we seeing more or less of that? And then, I try to just temper expectations when I like meet with a client, and I'm like, hey, like these are the metrics we're going to look at generally with B2B and e-commerce, but I'll let them know like, hey, first we're going to look at keywords rankings. That's not obviously our end goal, but like for now, when we're first kicking it off, like that's what we'll start with. Then I look at traffic. Then after a while, we can start looking at conversions, and usually I feel like it follows that trajectory. And I just let them know like there are probably things we're not tracking here, and we just have to take that, with a grain of salt and just accept that this is not perfect. But yeah, with B2B, if my client's willing, I definitely like to push self-reported attribution. I think it helps a lot. And then, sometimes you're not seeing a lot from search, and you can talk about like, is this still a good channel for you to invest in? Or, are you investing in it? It's getting awareness, but maybe it's not like the primary reason someone's converting. Maybe they saw something on social or whatever. So yeah,
it's
I don't know if that's a clear answer.
It is. It's kind of, we all know what we're talking about here. Like in B2B, as you were saying, there's the buying committee. There's a journey that's months long.
Yes.
It's so much more complex than in e-commerce, where you go into a shop, you click buy. It's not like that. We went to a Google event recently, our paid team. And they were talking about how even in e-commerce, there's about 2-3 touch points now with a company before you buy, which is, that's a little bit scary. If everything but I know from a user perspective, the way that I buy products is, oh my God, whatever I'm buying, I'm reading the reviews from one site. I go onto Amazon,
Reddit.
see what Amazon say, Reddit, all of this. So it's changing. It's becoming more and more complicated across the board, really. I agree with you, Ali.
No, I think it's really important because like I think people are just becoming like in e-commerce, and I think that's what I like with e-commerce clients in terms of content for e-commerce, right? Is that I think this is a positive, but e-commerce and people's purchasing behaviors have changed in the sense that they're looking for more kind of maybe socially responsible lifestyle considered, maybe like any they're making purchases in a more considered way, and purchasing habits have changed. So they want to buy from a business that is more aligned with their own values, right? And I think that's happening more and more. So it creates these little niche communities, and I think that's what like these e-commerce brands and these e-commerce businesses that do really well have this kind of sidearm of having and building these communities of, say, like recently a friend of mine has started a seed oil free snack, right? So there's a whole community of people that are really kind of considered and thinking about their purchases and consuming seed oils, right? Just like previously we've had like a rise in vegetarian and veganism, right? So you have these communities and these things that are developing, and then they really want to buy from brands that align with their values. And I think that as from an SEO point of view, I think that really helps, and that gets me excited because oh God, there's going to be so many content opportunities and a way that you can develop that brand and that business into something that's going to be an authority in that space, because you've got like potentially a very loyal customer base, right? So
yeah, the funnest brands to work with are the ones that have like really strong something about them that's unique. So sorry, and yeah, just while I'm thinking about it, like also I think a big difference is like where you do research in the two industries is very different, because to your point, like Reddit is like a huge asset, I think, for e-commerce. So is TikTok, so is lots of different social areas. Like there's so much keyword research opportunity there, whereas B2B SaaS, like that can come into play, B2B companies don't tend to like have as much there in my experience. So anyway, sorry, Emina, what were you going to say?
No, that was exactly kind of my point. I was thinking about the same thing, about how that impacts keyword research, and how there's different spaces where you would supplement your usual keyword research using Google, SEMrush, Ahrefs, whatever it may be. So it's interesting. One of the other things is, and Sean touched upon it a little bit, but so content. We know that B2B produces a lot of content, evergreen content, blogs, all of that stuff. E-commerce, not so much. Should e-commerce be producing more content? And what is your experience with what kind of content should they be producing, and some of the risks?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And I've seen it go both ways. So, sort of putting like a B2B strategy on an e-commerce brand with content can sometimes, and what I mean is like writing blogs just for blog's sake, right? You're like, I just need blogs, so I'm going to start writing them. It doesn't always make sense, right? It's like sometimes, it just doesn't make sense. So I think maybe talking more with that brand about what types of content work best for their industry. Like for some industries, blogs are helpful. Again, beauty brands, like sometimes people are asking questions about, I don't know, it's summertime, so like what sunscreen is best for, is mineral better than non-mineral? There's like lots of different things you could write about for beauty brands. But I worked with like a boat part company that they sell parts on like boats, and like for that brand, like I don't think blog content was necessarily the right way to go. It would be more like social content, video content, things like that. So I do think that e-commerce brands have to have lots of content, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be in blog form. And for some people, I actually think it sort of makes their site look messy and like, I don't know, it doesn't make them look good to have that blog content. For some, it does make a lot of sense, but yeah, I think just talking with them more, and again, this audience research comes into play, right? Like, does your audience read blogs, or do they really not care? Are they more interested in seeing videos of your product doing cool stuff? So yeah, I think just the type of content is different.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, I could sit here forever, particularly because I kind of feel like we have a very similar understanding of what SEO is, because a lot of people are not going to say that that's SEO. You saying to a client, you should have a video on there. It's, some might argue it's not really SEO unless you're, doing YouTube SEO or whatever. But for me, it's not about that. It's about kind of what makes sense for the client and their audience. So I always go in. It doesn't matter if it's technically SEO or if it's not SEO. I will always go in with things like that. So, good advice, Ali.
Yeah, I think being like more holistic has helped. Yeah. I think it helps SEO so much to be like, let's take a step back, and like, yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, head of digital marketing here. The other day, Sean asked
there you go.
So Sean asked me the other day, when are you going to become like the head of SEO? I said, never. He said, why not? I said, well, because, he said, you're already head of SEO. I said, well, it doesn't matter. I will never have that in my title because I'm too curious. Yes. And I think everything needs to work together to kind of just shoehorn myself.
I'm just going to sneak some SEO within brackets at the end of your title at some point.
Head of digital marketing and SEO.
And SEO,
really small.
Like digital SEO, like a little one.
Really good time, I think, to just go on to the final segment, really, which is Room 404. So our fans out there in the vast thousands and millions who are waiting patiently for this segment to arrive. It's finally here. So, Ali, we will invite you to banish something to Room 404, never to see the light of day again, unless it might get redirected out of there at some point. So yeah, it can be anything. It's bonus points, obviously, for digital marketing related, but it can be anything that you'd like to banish. So, Ali, please.
Yeah, well, it is going to be digital marketing related because I think what I would banish, and maybe people wouldn't agree with me, is like chaos and freaking out over all the Google updates. And I don't just mean algorithm updates. I feel like SEO is like, it's just so funny. Every time there's some new thing, it's like, we're dead, we're over, like, wow, dare Google. And I'm specifically thinking about like the AI overviews. I feel like that was just the latest example in like a long stream of Google changes that SEOs are just like going crazy over, and we're going to lose, tons of traffic. I honestly have not seen any impact, and I know they've sort of retracted it now. But anyway, I just feel like if you're just doing, to your point, Amina, like if you're just doing things holistically, it's going to work out. If you're like really caring about the brand and you're focusing on your customer, like don't be so scared of like all the changes, I feel like, and don't scare your clients about all the changes either. So maybe, updates are great. Letting them know what changes are coming is great, but freaking out about Google changes, let's kick that to the curb.
Don't freak out. That's a good one. Don't freak out.
Don't
Very
freak
good
out.
one, Ali. Great one.
Yeah, I want to hear yours.
Oh, we have.
You don't share yours?
No. We did plenty of these in earlier episodes. If you'd like to see Amina and I's contributions,
I'll go back
to Room
and find
404,
them.
it's full. The Room 404 is full.
It's already full.
We've had to come up with some creative storage solutions for those additions. So, but
awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great chat. Please share with our audience where they can find you online with your socials and things.
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter /X/ whatever it is now. But you can find me on LinkedIn. It's my maiden name, actually, Ali Hemming. But you'll find me under Ali Anderson as well. So, and I think I can share the link. So yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. You can also, of course, email me, shoot me an email. I think my email is on my LinkedIn as well. So.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great. It's been a good tour. I think everybody's going to really enjoy this one. So yeah, thanks very much. Amina, do you have any final words?
No, I mean, I loved having you, Ali. It was brilliant having a chat. So thank you.
Thank you. You guys are great hosts. Great chat.
Thank you. See, it ended with a compliment as well. This is you can come back, Ali. You can come
again.
back.
Compliment sandwich.
Ali.
There you go.
Brilliant.
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for this week, tuning into this week's episode. Please do leave a comment and start the discussion. And yeah, please do reach out to us if you'd like to ask us any questions, and reach out to Ali as well and connect with her on LinkedIn. So yeah, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.